The Constitution was not the product of a political philosopher or even a conscientious lawyer. It was a document by committee, forged in the middle of a political crisis. One of the first things that you should understand about the Constitutional Convention was that it was illegal. Leading citizens had remarked that Congress was the correct place to consider amendments to the Articles of Confederation. There was no real authority to just appear in some kind of convention off in Philadelphia. Rhode Island did not even bother to send delegates, but the other states did. They trickled into Philadelphia in May, and on Friday, May 25th, they opened the convention with a quorum. The delegates introduced themselves, presented their credentials, and read their instructions. Many of the delegates, it turned out, had been sternly instructed as to the limits of their power to press for changes to the Articles of Confederation. Delaware's delegates announced immediately that they would not participate if their state's equal vote in Congress was in any way threatened. So when I say the convention was illegal, I'm not exaggerating, not really. The whole idea of a convention was brand new, so they didn't really have any guidelines to go by. But at the very least, they had the following rules to consider. 1. The Articles of Confederation were perpetual. 2. Any amendment to the Articles of Confederation required the consent of all the states. And 3. Representation in the National Congress under the Articles of Confederation was one state equals one vote. These were the rules. But by the end of the convention, the Articles of Confederation had been annulled. The new Constitution required only 9 states to ratify rather than all 13, and representation was partially by population and partially by state. Those are pretty big changes. The way it happened was that basically there was a power grab. First, the convention adopted a rule of secrecy. Once the delegates agreed to this, the Virginia delegation, in cahoots with the Pennsylvania delegation, proposed a brand new plan for the government. Edmund Randolph made the presentation, but the plan had been drafted by James Madison. Because the plan was proposed by a member of the Virginia delegation, it became known as the Virginia Plan. Many of the delegates, especially those from smaller states, were alarmed. The Virginia Plan's primary change shifted representation in Congress. Rather than have equal state representation, the Virginia Plan had a population-based representation model. The convention took nearly 2 months to resolve the question of representation. Representation would be spread out over different bodies. In Congress, there would be 2 houses, each that had a different basis for representation. In the Senate, the states would be represented equally by 2 senators each. In the House of Representatives, representation would be proportional to population. Once representation was settled, the convention could turn and fold to other matters. It created an executive branch of government, something that the Articles of Confederation actually lacked. They also determined that federal law would be supreme, but limited the scope of the federal government to a certain number of enumerated powers. This was the idea of dual sovereignty, that 2 sovereigns can coexist in the same place. The result was American federalism, one of the only true innovations in political theory ever. The most notorious compromises were about slavery. The delegates were clearly uncomfortable with slavery. George Mason gave a long speech denouncing the slave trade, calling it that infernal traffic. James Madison was careful to scrub any mention of slavery from the document itself. That's why the 3/5 clause says other persons. But the 3/5 clause isn't the only compromise over slavery in the Constitution. There's also the slave trade clause, which forbids Congress from banning the slave trade for 20 years. And of course they don't call it the slave trade, they call it the migration or importation of persons. And then there is the fugitive slave clause, which forbids the states from harboring refugees from slavery, or, as they were called at the time, fugitive slaves. One last thing about all these compromises and all the messiness of the Constitution. There is a reason why the final document was not a mess, why it was nicely organized and actually quite a beautiful document. On September 10th, nearly 4 months after the convention had first opened for business, a committee of organization and style was appointed. The committee of style gave the job of writing up a final draft to Gouverneur Morris. Morris was a man of 35 when the convention took place. He was a tall man, a big man, over 6 feet tall. He was educated, studying first at Benjamin Franklin's preparatory school and then at King's College. This is what would become Columbia University. Two fun facts about Gouverneur Morris. The first is that he had a peg leg. In 1780, his leg was caught in the wheel of a carriage, badly breaking the ankle. His leg was amputated, and ever since, he went about on a peg leg. The second fun fact is about Morris's school days. Morris made a study of aesthetics rather than politics. He wrote his bachelor's thesis on wit and beauty, and his master's thesis on love. Now, he had plenty of time to practice politics, and he did, both as a delegate to the Continental Congress and later as a lawyer. But his education was broader and more liberal and, frankly, probably, reflected Morris's own love for women, wine, and song. Morris was a regular fixture in Pennsylvania high society teas and dinners, and he was well known for making plays on women, single and married alike. In fact, one of the prevalent rumors about Morris was that he had lost his leg not in a carriage accident, but rather leaping from a bedroom balcony to avoid a jealous husband who had returned, shall we say, a little earlier than Morris had expected. We have Morris to thank for giving us a beautiful Constitution. Take the preamble. The draft that Morris was handed read, "We the people of New Hampshire, Massachusetts," etc., etc. And Morris replaced this clunky listing of the states with something at once more vague and more specific. "We the people of the United States." Morris also penned the preamble's purpose statement. "We the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessing of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Morris also gave the Constitution structure. The draft he was handed was a jumble of different articles that had been put forward by the Committee of Detail, 23 in all. So Morris organized the Constitution into 7 separate articles, and he gave them a logical order. Article 1 covered the structure and powers of Congress. Article 2 organized the executive. Article 3, the judiciary. So there we have the first, second, and third branches of government. Article 4 dealt with federal relations, both interstate and between the state and the federal government. Article 5 covered future amendments. Article 6, some miscellany. And Article 7 gave instructions for ratification. Something else about the beautiful structure of the Constitution. Look at the overall effect. Article 1 is the longest section, and each following article is a little shorter than the last. Articles 1, 2, and 3 have a similar form. They move from description to qualifications for office, to selection, and then to specific powers. This kind of aesthetic organization directs the reader. It imposes an order through arrangement of the form. The Constitution can be read like a map. It walks you through each of the great departments of states, and then through federal relations, and all the way through the process by which the Constitution can be changed in the future. And finally, it points to the journey the Constitution will take during ratification. Even the signatures of the delegates are arranged geographically. People signed according to state delegations and in geographical order. If you understand all this about the Constitution, then it starts to make sense in ways it may not have before. For instance, if you were going to look for the enumerated powers of Congress, which article would you look in? Quick. Well, the answer, of course, would be Article 1, the article which deals exactly with Congress. If you were looking for the powers of the executive, where would you look? Article 2, and so on.